The boardroom on the 42nd floor overlooked the sprawling city below, but Elena Volkov never looked down. Her steel-gray eyes remained fixed on the quarterly report spread across the mahogany table, each number a testament to the empire she had built from nothing. At 38, she commanded respect through fear and admiration in equal measure. The media had dubbed her the Ice Queen of corporate America, a title she wore like armor. Elena's rise to power began 20 years earlier in a cramped studio apartment in Detroit. Her immigrant parents had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. When her father died in a factory accident and her mother succumbed to cancer within the same year, 18-year-old Elena found herself alone with nothing but fierce determination and a business degree she was still pursuing. The early days were brutal. She worked 3 jobs while finishing college, sleeping 4 hours a night and surviving on coffee and sheer willpower. Her first real break came when she impressed a venture capitalist with her innovative approach to supply chain management. He offered her a junior position at his consulting firm, where she quickly distinguished herself by solving problems others deemed impossible. Elena learned early that emotions were liabilities in the business world. She developed what colleagues called her ice wall, a carefully constructed barrier that kept personal feelings separate from professional decisions. This trait served her well as she climbed the corporate ladder, but it also earned her a reputation for being ruthlessly cold. By 25, Elena had founded her own consulting firm, Volkov Industries. She specialized in corporate restructuring, often called in to save failing companies through dramatic cost-cutting measures. Her methods were effective but harsh, earning her both success and enemies. She fired executives who had been with companies for decades, closed underperforming divisions, and eliminated thousands of jobs without a flicker of emotion. The business world took notice. Elena's firm grew rapidly, attracting high-profile clients who needed someone willing to make the hard choices their own executives couldn't. She hired only the best, paying top dollar for talent that could match her relentless standards. Her employees either thrived under her demanding leadership or burned out within months. Among those who thrived was Marcus Chen, a brilliant financial analyst who joined Volkov Industries when Elena was 32. Marcus was different from her other employees. While they cowered in her presence or competed ruthlessly for her approval, Marcus met her intensity with quiet confidence. He had an uncanny ability to anticipate her needs and deliver results that exceeded even her exacting expectations. Marcus came from humble beginnings similar to Elena's own. His parents had emigrated from Taiwan with nothing but dreams of a better life for their children. Like Elena, Marcus had fought his way through school and early career challenges, developing the same steel resolve that characterized successful immigrants. Perhaps this shared background explained why Elena gradually began to trust him in ways she had never trusted anyone else. Their professional relationship evolved slowly. Marcus proved himself indispensable during a particularly challenging acquisition that required 18-hour days for 3 months straight. While other team members cracked under the pressure, Marcus remained steady, often working through the night to ensure projects stayed on schedule. Elena began relying on him not just for his analytical skills but for his judgment. The media loved to speculate about Elena's personal life, particularly her apparent lack of romantic relationships. Gossip columns painted her as a woman who had sacrificed love for power, too cold and calculating to maintain normal human connections. The truth was more complex. Elena had built walls so high and thick that she had almost forgotten how to let anyone inside. Marcus was the exception. Over the course of 6 years, he became more than an employee, he became her closest advisor, the one person whose opinion she valued above all others. He understood her vision for the company and shared her commitment to excellence. More importantly, he seemed to understand her as a person, recognizing the vulnerability she hid behind her icy exterior. Their colleagues noticed the unique dynamic between Elena and Marcus. While she maintained professional distance from everyone else, she would spend hours in closed-door meetings with Marcus, discussing strategy and exploring new opportunities. He was the only person who could challenge her decisions without facing her legendary temper. Some whispered that their relationship went beyond professional bounds, but those rumors were unfounded. Elena's feelings for Marcus were deeper and more complex than simple attraction. Marcus represented everything Elena valued most: loyalty, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to shared goals. He had earned her trust through consistent performance and demonstrated commitment to her vision. In a world where Elena trusted no one completely, Marcus had become the exception that proved the rule. The first signs of trouble emerged during Elena's most ambitious project yet, the acquisition of Meridian Corporation, a struggling manufacturing giant with operations across 3 continents. The deal represented everything Elena stood for, taking a failing company and transforming it into a profitable enterprise through strategic restructuring and efficient management. Meridian's board of directors was desperate. The company was hemorrhaging money, facing potential bankruptcy within 18 months. Elena saw opportunity where others saw disaster. She proposed a complex restructuring plan that would eliminate redundant operations, streamline supply chains, and reduce the workforce by nearly 40%. The plan was typical Elena Volkov: brilliant, ruthless, and guaranteed to generate controversy. Marcus threw himself into the Meridian project with characteristic intensity. He spent months analyzing the company's operations, identifying inefficiencies, and developing implementation strategies for Elena's restructuring plan. His work was meticulous and comprehensive, earning praise even from Elena's harshest critics within the industry. The Meridian acquisition required Elena to secure massive financing from multiple sources. She leveraged every relationship she had built over 15 years in business, calling in favors and making promises to assemble the necessary capital. The deal stretched Volkov Industries to its limits, representing the largest and most complex transaction in the company's history. During the final negotiations, Elena noticed subtle changes in Marcus's behavior. He seemed distracted during meetings, frequently checking his phone and taking calls at odd hours. When questioned about his unusual demeanor, Marcus attributed it to stress from the demanding project timeline. Elena accepted his explanation, trusting his dedication to their shared goals. The media coverage of the Meridian acquisition was intense. Business journalists questioned Elena's aggressive timeline and the massive job cuts her plan would require. Labor unions organized protests outside Volkov Industries headquarters, carrying signs calling Elena a corporate vulture and demanding protection for Meridian's workers. Elena remained focused on the numbers. Her analysis showed that Meridian's current structure was unsustainable. Without dramatic changes, the company would collapse entirely, eliminating all jobs rather than just some of them. She viewed her intervention as necessary medicine, painful but ultimately life-saving. Marcus coordinated with investment banks, legal teams, and regulatory agencies to ensure the acquisition proceeded smoothly. His expertise proved invaluable as the deal navigated complex international regulations and antitrust concerns. Elena relied on his judgment completely, trusting him to handle critical details while she focused on high-level strategy. The signing ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. Elena had planned a celebration dinner for her core team, including Marcus, to mark the successful completion of their biggest deal yet. She looked forward to acknowledging Marcus's contributions publicly, something she rarely did but felt he had earned through his exceptional work on the project. On Wednesday evening, Elena received an unexpected call from her lead attorney. Meridian's board had called an emergency meeting to reconsider the acquisition terms. Details were unclear, but rumors suggested that previously unknown information about Volkov Industries had surfaced, causing board members to question Elena's credibility and the wisdom of proceeding with the deal. Elena immediately called Marcus to discuss damage control strategies. His phone went straight to voicemail. She tried his office line and found it similarly unresponsive. Growing concerned, Elena drove to his apartment, only to find it empty with no indication of where he might have gone. The next morning brought devastating news. Marcus had provided Meridian's board with detailed internal documents from Volkov Industries, including confidential financial projections, client lists, and strategic plans that painted Elena's methods in the harshest possible light. The leaked documents revealed the full extent of job cuts planned for Meridian and included damaging quotes from Elena's private communications about the company's workforce. The betrayal cut deeper than any business setback Elena had ever experienced. Marcus had not only destroyed the Meridian deal but had violated her trust in the most fundamental way possible. He had taken her private thoughts and strategies, carefully cultivated over months of collaboration, and weaponized them against her. Within hours, news of the leaked documents spread throughout the business world. Meridian's board voted unanimously to reject Elena's acquisition offer, citing concerns about her methods and commitment to preserving jobs. The company's stock price plummeted as investors realized that bankruptcy remained a likely outcome. Elena sat in her empty office that evening, staring at the city lights below and trying to process the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. She had built her career on the assumption that success justified any necessary sacrifices, but she had never considered that her closest ally might decide those sacrifices were too high a price to pay. The phone rang constantly as reporters sought comments about the failed acquisition and the leaked documents. Elena ignored them all, focusing instead on understanding how she had so completely misjudged someone she thought she knew better than anyone else in the world. The ice wall she had constructed around her emotions proved inadequate protection against this particular wound. For the first time in years, Elena Volkov allowed herself to feel the full weight of betrayal, and the pain was almost unbearable. The dragon she had nurtured and trusted had turned against her, and the consequences would reshape everything she thought she knew about loyalty, trust, and the price of power. The aftermath of Marcus's betrayal hit Elena with the force of a financial tsunami. Within 48 hours of the leaked documents becoming public, 3 major clients terminated their contracts with Volkov Industries, citing concerns about confidentiality and Elena's aggressive business practices. The company's carefully cultivated reputation for discretion and professionalism crumbled as competitors seized the opportunity to paint Elena as an untrustworthy corporate predator. Elena's legal team worked frantically to assess the damage and explore options for recovery. The leaked documents contained information covered by multiple non-disclosure agreements, giving Elena grounds for lawsuits against both Marcus and Meridian Corporation. However, her attorneys warned that legal action would keep the story in the headlines for months, potentially causing even more damage to her business. The financial implications were staggering. Volkov Industries had committed significant resources to the Meridian acquisition, including substantial legal fees, consulting costs, and preliminary financing arrangements that now carried hefty cancellation penalties. Elena's company faced its first quarterly loss in over a decade, threatening the stability she had worked 20 years to achieve. Media coverage grew increasingly hostile as journalists dug deeper into Elena's business practices. Stories emerged about her previous acquisitions, with former employees providing unflattering accounts of her leadership style. The narrative that emerged painted Elena as a corporate villain who destroyed lives for profit, with Marcus positioned as a whistleblower who had finally exposed her true nature. Elena found herself isolated in ways she had never experienced. Board members who had previously supported her unconditionally began questioning her judgment and demanding explanations for the security breach that had enabled Marcus's betrayal. Her remaining employees walked on eggshells, uncertain about their own job security as the company struggled to maintain its client base. The personal toll proved even more devastating than the professional consequences. Elena discovered that her ability to compartmentalize emotions, which had served her so well throughout her career, offered no protection against this particular type of pain. She had allowed Marcus inside her defenses, trusting him with vulnerability she had hidden from everyone else, and his betrayal felt like a violation of her very identity. Sleep became elusive as Elena replayed conversations with Marcus, searching for signs she had missed that might have warned her of his intentions. She analyzed every interaction from their 6-year relationship, wondering how someone she thought she knew so well could have deceived her so completely. The uncertainty was almost worse than the betrayal itself. 3 weeks after the initial crisis, Elena finally learned the full scope of Marcus's motivations through a devastating investigative report published by a prominent business magazine. The article revealed that Marcus had been approached by a coalition of labor unions and activist investors who opposed Elena's acquisition strategies and the massive job losses they typically generated. The coalition had spent months convincing Marcus that Elena's methods represented a form of corporate violence that destroyed communities and families for the sake of profit margins. They provided him with detailed analyses of the long-term consequences of her previous acquisitions, including suicide rates among displaced workers and economic devastation in affected regions. Marcus's decision to betray Elena had not been sudden or impulsive. According to the article, he had struggled with his role in her operations for over a year, gradually becoming convinced that his continued cooperation made him complicit in systematic harm to working-class families. The Meridian acquisition, with its planned elimination of over 20,000 jobs, had finally pushed him past his breaking point. The revelation that Marcus's betrayal stemmed from moral objections rather than personal gain or competitive pressure added another layer of complexity to Elena's emotional response. She could have understood greed or ambition as motives, but the suggestion that her life's work represented a form of evil challenged her fundamental beliefs about herself and her purpose. Elena's parents had immigrated to America seeking opportunity and financial security for their family. Her father had worked dangerous jobs in industrial plants, while her mother cleaned offices during night shifts to supplement their income. Elena viewed her success as vindication of their sacrifices and proof that hard work and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. The accusation that her methods harmed people like her own parents created a cognitive dissonance that Elena struggled to resolve. She had always justified difficult decisions by focusing on long-term benefits, saving failing companies, preserving some jobs rather than losing all of them, and maintaining economic efficiency in competitive markets. The suggestion that these justifications masked deeper moral failures forced Elena to confront uncomfortable questions about her legacy. Volkov Industries' stock price continued declining as investors lost confidence in Elena's leadership and the company's future prospects. Several board members privately suggested that Elena consider stepping down temporarily to allow the company to rebuild its reputation under different leadership. The idea of being forced out of the organization she had built from nothing represented the ultimate humiliation. Elena's few remaining allies in the business community urged her to fight back aggressively. They suggested launching a media campaign to discredit Marcus and the coalition that had recruited him, positioning Elena as the victim of an orchestrated attack by anti-business activists. Some recommended hiring private investigators to search for damaging information about Marcus's personal life that could shift public opinion in Elena's favor. The advice ran counter to Elena's instincts. Throughout her career, she had preferred to let results speak for themselves rather than engaging in public relations battles. The suggestion that she should attack Marcus personally felt both beneath her dignity and potentially counterproductive, since it would keep the story alive while making her appear vindictive. Instead, Elena chose a different strategy. She began conducting her own investigation into the coalition that had turned Marcus against her, not to discredit them publicly but to understand their methods and motivations. She wanted to know how they had identified Marcus as a potential ally and what specific arguments had convinced him to betray everything they had built together. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that had been monitoring Elena's activities for several years. The coalition included labor organizers, academic researchers, and activist investors who viewed aggressive corporate restructuring as a threat to American workers and communities. They had developed detailed profiles of key employees at major consulting firms, looking for individuals who might be susceptible to recruitment based on their backgrounds and apparent moral sensibilities. Marcus had been a perfect target. His immigrant background and middle-class upbringing made him sympathetic to arguments about corporate responsibility toward working families. His position within Elena's inner circle gave him access to information that could potentially derail her most ambitious projects. Most importantly, his close relationship with Elena meant that his betrayal would have maximum psychological impact. The coalition's approach had been patient and methodical. They spent months building a relationship with Marcus, initially presenting themselves as researchers studying the social impact of corporate restructuring. They gradually introduced more pointed criticisms of Elena's methods, providing Marcus with data about unemployment rates, mental health outcomes, and community decline in areas where Volkov Industries had conducted major restructuring projects. Elena recognized the sophistication of the operation that had turned Marcus against her. The coalition had understood that attacking her directly would be ineffective, since she had weathered criticism throughout her career without changing course. Instead, they had targeted her greatest vulnerability, her trust in the one person she believed shared her vision completely. The realization that Marcus's betrayal had been orchestrated by a larger movement rather than arising from spontaneous moral awakening provided Elena with a new framework for understanding what had happened. She began to see herself as a casualty in a broader ideological war about the role of capitalism and corporate power in American society. This perspective offered some emotional protection but also raised troubling questions about her ability to distinguish between genuine loyalty and sophisticated manipulation. If Marcus could be turned against her despite 6 years of close collaboration, how could she trust anyone in the future? The paranoia that had always lurked beneath her professional confidence began to take hold. Elena's investigation also revealed the broader scope of the coalition's activities. Marcus was not their only recruit within the corporate restructuring industry. They had successfully turned other key employees at competing firms, creating a network of insiders who could disrupt major acquisitions and corporate reorganizations through strategic leaks and coordinated opposition. The discovery that she was one target among many in a systematic campaign against her industry provided Elena with a different lens for viewing the crisis. Rather than seeing Marcus's betrayal as a personal failure or a unique vulnerability, she began to understand it as evidence of her effectiveness and influence. The coalition had targeted her precisely because her methods were successful and threatened their political agenda. Elena spent sleepless nights in her office, surrounded by financial projections and legal documents, plotting her response to the crisis. She could continue fighting to save Volkov Industries through conventional means, cutting costs, pursuing legal remedies, and trying to rebuild relationships with former clients. Alternatively, she could acknowledge that the business environment had changed fundamentally and that her traditional approach might no longer be viable. The choice between adaptation and defiance would determine not only the future of her company but also her own identity. Elena had built her entire adult life around the assumption that success justified any necessary hardships and that market forces ultimately produced optimal outcomes for society. The suggestion that her core beliefs might be wrong challenged everything she thought she knew about herself and her purpose. As winter approached, Elena found herself facing the most difficult decision of her career. She could attempt to salvage her reputation and rebuild her business by moderating her methods and embracing a more socially conscious approach to corporate restructuring. This path offered the possibility of redemption but would require acknowledging that Marcus's criticisms contained elements of truth. Alternatively, Elena could double down on her original philosophy, viewing the current crisis as temporary setback caused by external enemies rather than internal flaws. This approach would preserve her sense of moral certainty but might lead to continued isolation and eventual business failure. The woman who had once commanded respect through fear and admiration now faced a choice that would determine whether she could find a path back to relevance or would remain forever defined by the betrayal of the one person she had trusted completely. The Ice Queen's empire was crumbling, and even her legendary determination might not be enough to save what remained. 6 months after Marcus's betrayal, Elena made a decision that shocked the business world. Rather than trying to rebuild Volkov Industries or launching a campaign to destroy her enemies, she chose a path that no one had anticipated. She would confront Marcus directly and seek to understand his perspective before determining her next move. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a small coffee shop in downtown Chicago where neither Elena nor Marcus was likely to be recognized. Elena arrived first, choosing a corner table where she could observe the entrance. When Marcus walked through the door, she was struck by how much he had changed. The confident analyst who had once matched her intensity now appeared tired and uncertain, as if the weight of his actions had extracted a toll she had not expected. Marcus approached the table hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Elena had not seen him since the day before the Meridian documents leaked, and the months of media coverage and legal proceedings had transformed their former collaboration into something resembling a Cold War. Neither was certain how to begin a conversation that would address the destruction of everything they had built together. Elena spoke first, her voice carrying none of the anger that Marcus had expected. She asked simple questions about his motivations and the process that had led him to betray her trust. Marcus responded with careful honesty, explaining how the coalition had gradually opened his eyes to the human costs of their business model. He described visiting communities devastated by previous acquisitions and meeting families torn apart by sudden job losses. The conversation revealed the depth of Marcus's internal struggle during his final months at Volkov Industries. He had genuinely admired Elena's intelligence and determination, but he had also begun to question whether their success was worth the suffering it caused. The coalition had provided him with data and perspectives that he had never encountered within Elena's insular business environment. Marcus explained that his decision to leak the Meridian documents had not been motivated by personal animosity toward Elena but by his belief that preventing the acquisition would save thousands of jobs and preserve entire communities. He had known that his actions would destroy their relationship and likely end his own career, but he had concluded that these personal costs were acceptable if they prevented what he viewed as a greater harm. Elena listened without interruption, processing Marcus's explanations through the analytical framework she had always used to evaluate business problems. She found his reasoning logical within the context of his stated values, even though those values directly contradicted her own fundamental beliefs about market efficiency and corporate responsibility. The meeting lasted 4 hours, during which Elena and Marcus explored the philosophical differences that had ultimately made their collaboration impossible. Elena argued that market forces, however painful in the short term, ultimately produced optimal outcomes by directing resources toward their most productive uses. Marcus countered that human welfare should take precedence over abstract economic principles, particularly when market failures caused systematic harm to vulnerable populations. Neither convinced the other, but both gained insights that had been impossible during their previous relationship. Elena began to understand that Marcus's betrayal had stemmed from genuine moral conviction rather than personal weakness or external manipulation. Marcus recognized that Elena's methods, while harsh, arose from sincere beliefs about how to create prosperity and opportunity in competitive global markets. The conversation concluded without reconciliation or resolution, but it provided Elena with the clarity she needed to make her final decision about the future of Volkov Industries and her own career. She had entered the meeting hoping to find a path back to their former collaboration, but she left convinced that such reconciliation was neither possible nor desirable. Elena returned to her office that evening and began implementing a plan she had been developing for weeks. Rather than trying to save Volkov Industries through conventional means, she would liquidate the company's assets and use the proceeds to fund a new venture that would test whether Marcus's moral objections could be addressed without abandoning her commitment to business excellence. The announcement of Volkov Industries' dissolution sent shockwaves through the corporate restructuring industry. Elena's competitors scrambled to acquire her client relationships and hire her most talented employees, while financial analysts struggled to understand the logic behind her decision to abandon a company that could potentially be saved through aggressive cost-cutting and strategic repositioning. Elena used the proceeds from Volkov Industries' liquidation to establish the Meridian Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to developing innovative approaches to corporate restructuring that would minimize negative impacts on workers and communities. The Foundation's mission represented a dramatic departure from Elena's previous philosophy, but she approached it with the same analytical rigor that had made her famous. The Foundation's first project involved purchasing struggling manufacturing companies and implementing restructuring strategies designed to preserve as many jobs as possible while maintaining financial viability. Elena recruited a team of economists, social workers, and labor organizers to develop methodologies that would balance business requirements with community needs. Marcus watched Elena's transformation with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. He had achieved his goal of preventing the Meridian acquisition and exposing the human costs of aggressive restructuring, but he had not expected Elena to respond by fundamentally changing her approach to business. The Foundation's work represented exactly the kind of socially conscious capitalism that Marcus had hoped to promote through his betrayal. Elena's new venture faced enormous challenges from its inception. Traditional investors viewed the Foundation's mission as economically naive, while labor activists remained suspicious of Elena's motives and questioned whether she was capable of genuine change. The Foundation struggled to secure funding and credibility as Elena worked to prove that her commitment to social responsibility was authentic rather than merely strategic. The first major test of Elena's new approach came when the Foundation attempted to rescue a textile company in North Carolina that employed over 3,000 workers. Traditional restructuring methods would have required eliminating nearly half the workforce and relocating production to lower-cost facilities overseas. Elena's team proposed an alternative strategy that would maintain employment levels through worker retraining, technology upgrades, and gradual market repositioning. The textile project required Elena to negotiate with unions, community leaders, and government officials in ways that challenged every instinct she had developed during her previous career. She had to learn to view workers as partners rather than cost centers and to consider community impact as seriously as profit margins. The process was slow and frustrating, but it gradually produced results that satisfied both financial and social objectives. Marcus followed the foundation's progress through industry publications and occasional media coverage. He recognized the sincerity of Elena's efforts but remained uncertain about whether her transformation represented genuine philosophical evolution or merely tactical adaptation to changed circumstances. The question of Elena's true motivations would ultimately be answered through the Foundation's long-term performance rather than its initial promises. 2 years after their confrontation in the Chicago coffee shop, Elena and Marcus encountered each other at a business conference focused on sustainable economic development. Elena was presenting the Foundation's methodology to an audience of corporate executives and social activists, while Marcus was attending as a representative of the coalition that had originally recruited him. Their brief conversation after Elena's presentation revealed how much both had changed since the collapse of their original partnership. Elena had developed a more nuanced understanding of corporate responsibility, while Marcus had gained appreciation for the complexities of balancing social goals with economic realities. Neither had abandoned their core beliefs, but both had evolved in response to their shared crisis. Elena's presentation received mixed reactions from the conference audience. Corporate executives appreciated her analytical approach but questioned the financial sustainability of her methods. Social activists welcomed her commitment to worker welfare but remained skeptical about whether fundamental reform was possible within capitalist frameworks. The Foundation's work continued to generate controversy and debate within both business and activist communities. Some viewed Elena's transformation as proof that even the most ruthless corporate executives could develop social consciousness when confronted with the human consequences of their actions. Others dismissed her new venture as an elaborate public relations exercise designed to rehabilitate her reputation without addressing systemic problems in corporate culture. Elena found herself occupying an uncomfortable middle ground between two worldviews that she had once thought were irreconcilable. Her foundation achieved modest successes in preserving jobs and supporting communities, but it also faced constant pressure from board members who wanted faster financial returns and activists who demanded more radical changes to corporate governance. The personal cost of Elena's transformation proved as significant as the professional challenges. She had built her identity around being the most effective restructuring expert in the industry, and her new role required her to accept slower progress and more complex measures of success. The Ice Queen persona that had once protected her from emotional vulnerability became a liability in work that required genuine empathy and collaboration. Marcus's betrayal had ultimately succeeded in ways that neither he nor Elena had anticipated. Rather than simply exposing the flaws in Elena's business model, it had forced her to confront fundamental questions about purpose, responsibility, and the relationship between individual success and collective welfare. The dragon had turned against his queen, but in doing so he had created possibilities for growth and change that their previous partnership could never have achieved. Elena's story became a case study in business schools and policy institutes, used to explore questions about corporate responsibility, stakeholder capitalism, and the potential for individual transformation within established systems. Some students viewed her journey as inspirational evidence that people could change course when confronted with the consequences of their actions. Others saw it as a cautionary tale about the limits of market-based solutions to social problems. 5 years after the founding of the Meridian Foundation, Elena published a memoir titled The Dragon's Gift that provided her perspective on the crisis that had transformed her life and career. The book became a bestseller among business readers seeking to understand how successful executives could adapt to changing social expectations while maintaining their commitment to excellence and achievement. Marcus declined to write his own account of the events that had brought down Volkov Industries, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves through the policy changes and corporate reforms that the coalition continued to promote. He had achieved his primary goal of disrupting Elena's most harmful acquisition and had contributed to broader changes in how the restructuring industry approached worker displacement and community impact. The relationship between Elena and Marcus never fully recovered, but both recognized that their conflict had ultimately produced outcomes that neither could have achieved alone. Elena's foundation had demonstrated that socially conscious restructuring was possible, while Marcus's betrayal had proven that insider resistance could effectively challenge corporate practices that caused systematic harm to vulnerable populations. Elena's transformation from Ice Queen to social entrepreneur represented one of the most dramatic career reinventions in modern business history. Whether viewed as genuine redemption or calculated adaptation, her journey illustrated the potential for individuals to transcend their original limitations when confronted with undeniable evidence that their fundamental assumptions might be wrong. The dragon's betrayal had shattered Elena's empire, but it had also liberated her from constraints she had not realized were holding her back. In losing everything she thought she wanted, Elena had discovered possibilities for meaning and impact that her previous success had never provided. The ice had finally melted, revealing a human being capable of growth, change, and, perhaps even wisdom.